welcome to Culturally Illiterate, a podcast where four friends overthink comic book movies. I'm one of your hosts, Jake, and my favorite character in all of fiction is One Piece.
God damn it,
are my
you
friends and fellow co-hosts.
stole it! I was going to say that!
I had something else and I knew you were going to do it.
Preemptive.
Well, I am Jason, and I am the proud owner of a Perry the Platypus onesie. Shout out Alex, who gave it to me.
Hi, I'm Matt, and wait, I forgot the order. Do we do a fun fact now, or do we do it later?
Yes, we do the fun fact now. Does the order matter? Not really.
Oh, okay.
Matt, this is episode 37 that we're recording, and you've still... Every day is a new day for you.
I don't pay attention to what we're doing.
Quite
Anyway.
Do you think Matt watched the movie?
I
Did you do your
actually did
homework,
watch
Matt?
the movie. I did do my homework, begrudgingly. Anyway, I want to list a fun fact I found about Iron Man, actually. So this was labeled under goofs in IMDb. So when Tony Stark's convoy was being attacked by the terrorist organization, U.S. soldiers are specifically trained to never stop when ambushed, but then they did the exact opposite. So that's my fun fact.
People mess up sometimes.
That's because the front vehicle was disabled, and you can't keep moving forward when the front vehicle is disabled.
Mysterious new voice.
Oops. Actually, I don't know if that's true, but it is common practice.
So, hi, I'm Sean. My fun fact is that I'm currently in the process of making blackberry-infused tequila.
That sounds so good. You gonna let me have some?
It's, we're gonna see what happens. I have to do it for like 2 weeks, and then I'm gonna make margaritas out of it. We're
Well,
gonna see what
I
happens.
ain't going anywhere. Let's drink it on the pod.
That would be
Oh.
beautiful.
I'll drink
All
you
right,
on the
well,
pod.
if people somehow hadn't noticed, there is indeed a fifth voice. And that's because for the first time in the history of the Culturally Illiterate podcast, we're welcoming our first ever guest, my and Jason's dad.
Hi, I'm Matt. My fun fact is I'm Jake and Jason's dad. Also, I spent 21 months working in Saudi Arabia.
Incredible.
So there's two Matts, so that'll be interesting.
Yep.
Well,
I also
Jake
go
and I
by
are going to
Wait,
call
wait,
him
wait.
Dad, so...
How about
that-
we call one
Or
Matt
the
Asian
hype.
Matt, the other Matt Nepotism Matt? How about that?
I was just gonna call him Large Homie and make it easy.
Large
Large
homie?
homie, dad, the hype.
He goes by many
Um,
names, but
It's not
Yes.
it's not like I'm small though. That's the problem.
Matty J,
Well,
that's another one you can
Fair.
call him.
It's about the vibes.
Okay.
The Asian Matt. You do?
I do.
Sorry, my dad just got excited because he looked ahead at the outline, and the thing I'm shouting out today, the charity we're shouting out, apparently my dad gives to, so that's nice. What do you know? Anyway, so yeah, we're gonna start having guests on this thing, and Sean and I actually just spent New York Comic Con long weekend in New York with my dad, which is where my favorite character is. If you've listened to the podcast before, you may know that I thought the character Luffy from One Piece was named One Piece. So for the entire 4 days of New York Comic Con, originally anytime somebody was in a Luffy cosplay, Sean would go, "Look, it's your favorite character, One Piece," and then it was anything. I believed you. You didn't show me proof of your donation. And then it was every time anything One Piece related, and then it was anything anime related, and then it was just anything Sean felt like pointing to and going, "Look, it's your favorite character, One Piece." So I wanted to beat him to the punch this week. That's my story from the Comic-Con. Only thing I can remember. Sean ruined it.
Oh, before we get into a movie, I actually do have a rec.
Yeah, what's up?
All right, so I have.
You wanna say
guys
it?
actually might have heard. Oh, I was going to get to it. The thing is that you guys might have heard of it already because it's already garnered like over 20 million views. But there was an animated pilot that came out on YouTube exclusively called The Amazing Digital Circus.
Oh, yes, I know.
News to me.
It is. Yep, it is an animated pilot animated by indie studio called Glitch Productions. It is actually great. It is if you're like into those like creepy like mascot how do I say it? It's like Five Nights at Freddy's, like that type of like horror where it's like the character designs are obviously inspired from like character designs
Cheese.
of like kid shows, but then it has, like darker tones to it, and stuff like that. I am so lost in how to describe this genre, but I hope you guys know what I'm describing. But it basically has that vibe, and it's very, very good. It's very funny. It's very well animated. You would not know that this was animated by an indie studio. And it actually has very intriguing plot twists. And it has a lot of lingering questions that make you want more. And I do want more. I really like what I've seen from Amazing Digital Circus. And for those who haven't seen it, you should watch it. The Amazing Digital Circus.
Amazing Digital Circus. It's on YouTube. Okay, yeah, I haven't heard about that till now, actually. Despite its apparent success. So you said it's a pilot. They're looking to make more.
Most likely yes, because it has garnered millions and millions of views. So it is very successful.
I like horror, and we're recording this.
It's not exactly horror.
November, but
it's not exactly a horror. It's more
creepy.
It's a little creepy. It can be a little creepy. It has creepy elements to it, but it's mostly humorous. And the creepiness, I should say it's more unsettling because I don't want to say too much. But what the characters go through in this world.
Already sold.
All right. Well, I want to sell it to anyone who's listening because I know. Anyway, it's not really a horror. It's more of like a mystery. Because there's so much you don't know about the world, and it's very, very interesting. And it does have creepy moments. Not exactly scary moments, but moments where you are not very settled. Unsettled is basically what I'm trying to get at. But yeah, that's basically it. Watch it. It's only like 20 minutes long. If you can sit by and like spend 20 minutes of your TikTok time to this one short, I promise you it'll be worth it.
Well, you made me think of a story actually that I'm glad the unsettling nature made me think of a story I want to tell you. I want to drop it before I forget. But thanks for that because I'm very intrigued by that actually. I don't know why I said actually. Whoops. So I had to go to a wedding the other weekend, and it was in, I had to like travel for it, and we were on these, like the grounds of this, like, I don't know if you'd call it a country club. It was like a big ass golf course and a bunch of fancy buildings for like really rich people.
Sounds like a country
And
club,
during
bud.
the wedding, well, I know, but it wasn't labeled as one, so I don't know, like, it was weird. It had like, so anyway, we were staying on there for like a weekend. And during the wedding itself, we had to go to the bathrooms that were in like the locker rooms for the main building. But they were like I'm not talking like high school gym locker rooms. They're like all wooden and like this nice like fabric for the seating. But they're downstairs with no signal. There's no signal in the basement of this building, and they're like a maze. There's like all these different paths through them. It was really, really weird. And they have the stall doors that are like, have you ever been in a bathroom that has like wooden slated stall doors to the point of like you can just straight up like someone could see you taking your shit if they wanted to. Like there's nothing actually. It had those types of doors. It was like a wooden maze down there. You had no phone signal, so it was already weird enough being down there on the first time. Then later in the day, I went down to the bathroom again, and the lights have been turned off. I have no signal, and so I put my phone flashlight on. I'm looking around trying to find light switches. There's no one down there, but I found a pair of shoes in the corner, which like realistically is just someone who like left their shoes there after a day of golfing or whatever. But when you're like down in a dark basement that looks like a maze effectively, and there's no lights and no phone signal, it's a little unnerving. Like if you see that like liminal spaces account on like probably every social has one. I think there's like an Insta and a Twitter, but it was very creepy. And then I finally found the light switches and they like flickered on. They gotta have a better system set up because I'm sure the people who like go to this place regularly pay a lot of money, but it was very. I was so convinced I was gonna like get murdered in the bathroom when I found shoes.
The lights will flicker on.
Well, the
and
lights
off.
were flickering, and I had no like. You could murder someone. It was and I wasn't alone. Every single person that I talked to about the bathrooms, and I talked to plenty.
All I'm
hearing
is that
Jake, that's great.
All I'm hearing is that Nosferatu was in the bathroom.
No, so Jake was just going around at this wedding to other people like, yo, so what do you guys think of the bathroom?
Did you read One
That's
Piece
what
in
happened.
the bathroom?
Both happened at certain points.
I have
There
some
was a number one and a number two.
I have some Rex.
A number one piece.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, I'd like to recommend the new album by Knucklepuck. Well, it's new as we record this. It won't be new to you guys. But I think it's their best album since their first album, Copacetic, which is also a great record. So I would highly recommend it. It's very, very good. A bit more aggressive than their past music, which I like. Yeah, and also a content creator by the name of Frank Michael Smith. He makes sports related content on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. I first saw him on TikTok, and he makes just short, very entertaining, chill videos about sports news, takes, whatever. And he recently posted a Twitter thread about iconic touchdown celebrations in the NFL that have gotten people fined, and I love that shit. So I quote tweeted it, and then he actually liked my quote tweet and responded to me and said, "Thanks, my guy." So I thought that was nice. So
Well,
shout
that's
out
neat.
to Frank Michael Smith. He's a very, very cool guy.
Sounds like a nice fellow.
He has a real nice way of talking. He's got a
All
real
right.
real calm, soothing voice.
Well, if we're doing Rex,
If you have a rec dropper, yeah, you can.
I would always recommend reading Thomas Sowell, Sowell. The man's 93 years old and he just dropped another book. He's written about 40 books. Any one of them would be good.
93 in writing is I don't want to write now, and I'm 25.
The guy
I
is,
can
I
only
love-
imagine
I love the
the mental
way
fortitude of that man.
that Dad was talking about that like it was like a mixtape. He goes 93 and he just dropped another book.
I'm
Um,
trying to communicate to you youngins.
youngins, okay. Well,
I have one rec as well. I'll
Okay,
make mine
okay.
quick. Mine is I went to see Killers of the Flower Moon. It was very
oh, I'm
good.
so jealous. I haven't seen it yet.
I heavily recommend it. It was very, very good. It's also 3 hours and 30 minutes, but it did not feel like 3 hours and 30 minutes.
Yeah, I need to find an open Sunday to go catch a matinee.
If I
It's
could-
worth it.
I don't got 3 hours and 30 minutes like that though.
I was shocked by the amount of time, but really when you're watching it, it doesn't feel like it's 3 hours and 30 minutes, but yeah.
But that's
You did Oppenheimer and Barbie back to back.
We did do that.
Jake, suck my nuts. How about that? Have you thought about that?
I think about it
No
every
comment.
day.
I love you, Sean.
I forgot my second rec, and that is go to YouTube, type in Dracula Flow. You won't be disappointed.
Yeah,
I
that's a fact.
back that.
That's a
I
fact.
back that.
Well,
Um,
I'm going to tell you right now, we can move on, and when it comes to you, just say it, because this podcast lacks any kind of structure whatsoever. So
Well, we're
It doesn't
really
matter.
choppy. This is the first time we've been back, back on the horse, so to speak, in a couple weeks, actually. So we're expect when we've been cooking. God, I hated that I said that. We kind of go a lot more naturally. Right now, I think we're a little choppy, but we're also gonna leave in the part of me saying that in because then it feels like, oh wow, they're self-aware. So we're covering Iron Man this episode. From what were you gonna say, Jason? I heard that you.
I was gonna call you gay.
That's hateful. Released on May 2nd, 2008. It's the first official entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Written by Mark Vegas, Hawk Ostby. This is always fun when I'm trying to remember these names, look at these names and say them smoothly. Art Markham and Matt Holloway. Directed by Jon Favreau and shot by Matthew Libatique. It stars, of course, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark / Iron Man, not Don Cheadle as James Rhodey Rhodes, Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane / Ironmonger, Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts, Jon Favreau as Happy Hogan. I don't know how to type, apparently. That or I'm going to
What
blame
the-
Sean. Sean messes with the outline.
No, I didn't
Sean
mess with this
Tobin?
one. What is
No,
that?
it must have been your fault. It must have been your fault that Hogan got mixed with the word Sean. Sean Tobe is
It's
Yinsen,
not
Paul
even
Bettany is
spelled right.
Jarvis, and Clark Gregg is Agent Phil Coulson. But before going to the podcast, we're gonna shout out www.womenagainstabuse.org. It's an organization whose goal is to provide quality, compassionate, and non-judgmental services in a manner that fosters self-respect and independence in persons experiencing intimate partner violence and to lead the struggle to end domestic violence through advocacy and community education. Go to their website. They'll have details on donating, on how you can get involved and learn more about preventing domestic violence. It's a great resource if you need one, or if you're unfortunate enough that you know someone else who needs it. But rather than talking about the lesser roads, I just wanted to shout that out.
Yeah, and also shout out Don Cheadle because he is amazing.
And
It's
as far
fucked
as
up.
I'm aware, does not hit women or allegedly hit women.
Yeah, and of course that, but it's also fucked up that he wasn't roadie to begin with because listen, I've never
Oh.
once seen a movie with Don Cheadle in it and not been excited to see Don Cheadle.
I don't know. It's hard for me to ever describe being excited about Hotel Rwanda, but
I don't know. I'm
he
always
isn't Dave. You
pleased
should
to
catch up on
see his
Dave.
face.
Oh,
I'm just
he's in
always
Dave.
pleased to see his face. Is what I'm getting at.
But before we're talking about like the plot itself, I kind of wanted to ask you guys on like your history with the character of Iron Man, and if you remember specifically like how you felt about the character, or your interactions with the character before and after the release of this movie. Obviously, like four of the five of us were like fairly young. I was what it was 2018, so I was 50. I was like 10 when this came out. But the character kind of famously was a bit of a C-lister before this movie blew him up onto being like a premier superhero. So I was wondering if you guys had, how that went specific, each of you, like individually.
Yeah, I mean, I think my main interaction with the character was through Marvel Ultimate Alliance as a child because that game was fucking sick, and he was in it, and he was one of the many playable characters, and yeah, that game was so fucking fun, and it was a big part of my childhood, and that introduced me to a lot of Marvel characters. And I don't necessarily know that introduced me to Iron Man, but I definitely think that it was a formative part of my memory of him before I had even seen this movie. Then I remember seeing this movie when it came out. It's one of the earliest movies I remember seeing.
That's it?
You can just talk, right? You don't have to wait for anybody else. You could just jump in. There's no order.
I mean, I don't want to jump when someone's speaking mid-sentence, unlike some people in this podcast, so,
Ooh.
Anyway, I actually was exposed to this character before the 2008 movie. I actually watched... There was an old animated TV show of Iron Man. I have no idea what it's called. But
Was it
I know
the
it's
60s
old,
one or the
based
90s
on-
one?
It might have been the 90s one.
I know the 90s
Let
one.
me see.
that you're talking-
Yes,
if
it was
that's
the
one you're
90s
talking
one.
about.
I actually watched this show. I forgot how. And I don't know where. Maybe it was on demand or something when that was a thing. But I was really, really into the show. And the only reason why I was because I was super into mecha, which is like a genre of anime, and it had like a man in a metal suit. I'm like, oh my god, that's awesome! And so I started watching it, and that's my first exposure to Iron Man, War Machine, the the Mandalorian? No.
Mandarin.
The Mandarin.
Mandalorian?
Hey, Matt, what language do you speak? Other than
Mandarin.
English. Yeah, there you go.
Look at that.
That's what makes it so funny. He couldn't remember the word and he speaks.
I'm going to piggyback on Matt's because there's the theme from that animated Iron Man in the 60s is actually played in several scenes of this movie. I don't remember which ones, but it's in the background playing.
So you also had some cartoon exposure in your youth.
Right, but actually, I being older than the other gentleman on the podcast, just a little bit, I actually read a novelized form of the original Iron Man comic book of Iron Man, I guess #1, so I was, and I had bought the Iron Man comic books and read them pretty avidly from the time I was like 12 till I was 14, and so to me, he was never a B list. It's like it always had to remember that for most people, there was Batman, Robin, Superman, which were DC, and the only real Marvel character that people knew that was A list was Spider-Man.
I mean, Hulk had a show in the 80s.
Yeah, Hulk did too, and that
And
was later.
The X-Men in the 90s were huge.
But yeah, you're right. That's true because some more animation was coming out by that point. But when I was
Mhm.
in my youth, um, to me, Iron Man was an A-lister. But most people, to the average teenager on the street, they wouldn't have known who he was. But yeah, I do remember reading the original one, and obviously the original one was Vietnam. He was captured by the Viet Cong. They had to update that just a tad.
Sliding time scale. I
Yeah,
mean,
that
that's, I
that wasn't
mean,
quite happening in 2008.
Are
just
you
because it
sure?
ties into my answer. I mean, the guy who just talked is my exposure to pretty much any of this, reading my dad's old comics. I know I've said that before, but Iron Man was one that like you had plenty of Iron Man, but it was never one of the ones that was like my number like my go-tos were Spider-Man, Moon Knight, and I liked Avengers just because there was so many characters. But because of that, I was aware of him being an Avenger. I was aware of all that. But it wasn't until like 2008 this movie came out, and then 2009 a new cartoon started for Iron Man, where he was like a teenager, and that's when he started to become like, oh, this is a big character. My Iron Man reading experience is limited, but yeah, I mean this movie I think changed his perception for the mass public for sure.
Yeah, and I will also give credit to I did read some of Dad's old comic books, so it wasn't just Marvel Ultimate Alliance that gave me exposure to that, but Jake just took more to that because I never actually learned how to read.
Well, I can't read.
That's only half true. Half true.
What's only half true?
Damn.
Never
We
mind.
deserve the full truth.
Okay, Sean, what about you?
So I can't remember when my first interaction with like Iron Man was. The one that I mostly remember from when I was little was watching the I think it was like 2006 or something, but they had that like Ultimate Avengers animated movie that came out.
Oh,
That was
that
6 or
shit
7, I think.
was
Or 5 or 6.
sturdy.
So like I remember that heavily influencing a lot of how I felt. I know originally just because of like most of the interactions I had with like the character itself was him in the red and yellow suit, and I always just saw him as goofy for some reason. Maybe in just the way that he looked more than anything else. But like I didn't have too much interaction with the character because I was more invested in other characters at the time. So not a whole lot actually.
He
I know
he
there's,
was
like-
on the Guardians for a while though, and that's your bag.
Well, yeah, he was on the Guardians, but not until like later on. And then on top of that, I think I also had interactions with him from like Marvel Ultimate Alliance, so I got a little bit there too.
Yeah, brother.
All right, I'm gonna move ahead and just kind of get started on the story of the movie because really the movie's pretty simple. It
Oh my
opens
God,
with
we
a
haven't
bang,
gotten
in
to
my
the plot
opinion,
yet?
with
Oh my
literally.
goodness.
But what happened, Matt?
Huh?
I thought I heard you say, "Oh my god."
Oh, I said, oh my God, we haven't gotten to the plot yet. We've just been rambling
Oh,
for
I
20
thought.
minutes.
Oh my god! You every time you say, "Oh my god," I'm scared that your computer crashed.
Matt's computer
For,
exploded.
for listeners, not through any fault of his own, Matt has had the most
No,
technical
the way I
difficulties, so I'm a
report
little bit
and
jumpy when
the way I
he says, "Oh my
report
god."
news, the way I report news is like an Asian kid telling his parents he got a B on the test. That's how I do it.
Jake, can you call me dad
Oh god, call him
or
daddy.
mom? My friend's wife told me to call her mommy once. That was weird.
Some people
ooh.
would pay for that.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Some people.
Anyway, so it starts. I think the movie comes out swinging with with Tony and the Humvee, and it explodes, and then it kind of takes you back to what led up to that explosion. Tony Stark, he's inherited a defense contracting company, Stark Industries, from his late father Howard, and is in war-torn Afghanistan with his friend and military liaison, Lieutenant Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes, to demonstrate the new Jericho missiles from Stark Industries. After the demonstration, his convoy is ambushed, and Stark is critically wounded by a missile used by his attackers, one from his own company. He's captured and imprisoned in a cave by a terrorist group called the Ten Rings. Yinsen, a fellow captive and doctor, implements an electromagnet in Stark's chest to keep the shrapnel shards from reaching his heart and killing him. The Ten Rings leader, Raza, offers Stark freedom in exchange for building a Jericho missile for the group, but he and Yinsen believe that Raza will not keep his word. Stark and I'm actually going to keep going for a little bit since we took a little to get it going, but Stark and Yinsen secretly build a small and powerful electric generator called an arc reactor to power Stark's electromagnet and a prototype suit of armor to aid in their escape. Although they keep the suit hidden almost to completion, the Ten Rings eventually discover their hostages' intentions to escape and attack the workshop. Yinsen sacrifices himself to divert them and buy time while the suit powers up. The armored Stark battles his way out of the cave to find the dying Yinsen, discovering that the family Yinsen had mentioned earlier about wanting to return to are indeed already dead, and now he's returning to see them. Tony burns the Rings weapons and flies away, crashing in the desert and destroying the suit. After being rescued by Rhodes, Stark returns home and announces that his company will cease manufacturing weapons. Obadiah Stane, his father's old partner and the company's manager in his absence, advises Stark that this could ruin Stark Industries and his father's legacy. In his home workshop, Tony builds a sleeker, more powerful version of the improvised armor suit, as well as a more powerful arc reactor for it in his chest. Personal assistant Pepper Potts, who there's an obscene amount of sexual tension with, places the original reactor inside a small glass showcase reading proof that Tony Stark has a heart after helping him replace it. Though Stane requests details, a suspicious Stark decides to keep his work to himself. Meanwhile, Agent Phil Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division repeatedly attempts to make an appointment with Tony through Pepper. So that's the first 40 or 45 minutes of the movie. And I want to say, I feel like we've complained a lot in the past about movies that take too long to get going. And this kind of subverts that by making his origin story an action set piece in and of itself and just going right into the bomb hitting the Humvee.
Yeah, I love the beginning of this movie. I think it does everything right in telling an origin story, to be honest. It immediately sets a tone for the type of person that Tony is, and then immediately goes forth with it, you know?
Yeah, I can agree with that.
I was gonna say, so the one thing that, I love that this does is it does a lot of, showing and not telling, which is usually the case. You get to see a lot of Tony's mannerisms and just how he acts as a person. You see his character, and it's immediately, he has so many things to him and so many facets to him right from the start within the first scene that you get an idea of who he is just by the way he talks, the way he acts, the way he moves, the way he, interacts with the people in the Humvee before they explode. So it's just, it's so interesting to see this one just immediately come out swinging and it crafts everything perfectly in a way that it doesn't have to waste its time. And I think that it really feels like it respects the audience just by focusing so much on heavy hitting details, but two, and just the acting and the performances right from the start. It's so great at just showing everybody's mannerisms and making characters through the way that they act, and not just by exposition or by saying something about his damaged his damaged past and how he's gone through so much trauma or anything like that. It kind of just you get a lot of these mannerisms and these feelings about the characters from them and just what they do rather than exposition.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the performances, because I wanted to say too, Robert Downey Jr. from the moment he's on the screen is just one of the most charismatic motherfuckers you've seen in a movie. Even though he's kind of being a jag, being a little egotistical and whatnot, he just takes your attention. He's captivating.
Well, yeah. The thing is that you can make a character so easily dislikable. You can make him so distasteful so easily by making him seem cooler or have bravado. But Robert Downey Jr. walks that line perfectly of being a total ass and yet being so likable. It's not easy to pull off. It is really hard to pull off, and he pulls it perfectly. And I want to go back to what Sean was saying. The execution of this movie is absolutely incredible. From the first scene of the movie, you don't even get to see they get a brief introduction. Tony Stark gets a brief introduction, but he doesn't have a lot of time to interact before the ambush happens, and yet you get to know the character through so few interactions, and then going through his backstory and seeing what a brash and egotistical person he is. He's just so charismatic, you can't bring yourself to dislike him. And it's absolutely incredible. It's absolutely incredible how they introduce this character and totally flesh him out in a very well-paced way.
Well, okay. In terms of you saying he's not likable, depending on how much you want to buy into how much of Stan Lee is fact and how much of it is myth created to sell comics, the story goes that he created Tony Stark as a bet that he could make a character that was unlikable and it would still sell.
Mm-hmm.
And if that is true, it worked. He won the bet.
Yeah, he was very successful in doing that. He's very charismatic. He's also very funny. And so you absolutely dislike him, but you're laughing at all his jokes and you're being swayed by his charisma, and so you're just being carried away by Tony Stark, and you can't bring yourself to dislike him. That's the amazing part about this movie, is that this character is just he should be so unlikable, but you absolutely love him by the end of it.
I'm going to obviously agree with all that, but I'm going to take it a step further. I think the dynamic between him, because the initial scene is the attack, and then they jump to the 36 hours earlier, and you just feel like between Downey, Bridges, and Paltrow, it's like they've known each other all along. You never feel like they have to grow into the relationship. It just feels fully formed right out of the gate. And
I can agree with
I
that.
can't say enough about Downey Jr. I'll say that's the one thing that I find I don't remember reading the comic that he was like the witty, sarcastic guy. That was always Spider-Man's. So that was a little twist, but he does it brilliantly. He's just so quick with the quips and the statements. And the other thing I'll say is, and again, this is me going back to the old man nostalgia. It tracked pretty darn well. Obviously, with the update of it being Afghanistan versus Vietnam, it pretty much tracked to the original story. I mean, up to the point of and I don't remember the character's name, the assistant that Yinsen, who buys him extra time, same as the original story, other than the fact that Yinsen was a Vietnamese gentleman.
Instead of a
character,
Afghan man.
Yes, whose name I can't remember, but I'm going to blame that on having read it 40 years ago. The one last thing I'll say is one of the first things he does he's taking selfies with the soldiers, and the guy holds up the peace sign, and he's kind of mocks it a little bit, like, yeah, peace. And then he says, well, I'd be out of business if it was peace. So at that point, it's like, yeah, he's selling arms. He's as Bridges' character Obadiah says later, they're warmongers.
And you're familiar with doing work over in the Middle East, as established earlier.
Yes, but not as a warmonger.
So you say.
I have a bit of a fun fact, though, real quick. So
yeah, what's up?
I want to go back to what other Matt was saying about how the dialogue feels so natural, and that it is actually due to the fact that I believe it was because Robert Downey Jr. ad-libbed a lot of his lines, and the other actors had to bounce off of him because he wouldn't stick to the script. And apparently it was very, very difficult, especially for Gwyneth Paltrow. But I think they did a very good job.
Well, the other thing about it is that this movie never had a finished script.
Yeah.
Like, they started filming it wasn't even just him going off script. There was points where there was just straight up not a script.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
I don't believe they ever actually even, whatever the finished script looks like, it's finished because they were making it as they were filming, is my understanding. Which is why,
kudos to
build
them.
on what you were saying, Downey and Downey's very good by, this movie as a whole, I think, has this, lightning in a bottle flying by the seat of their pants. Just everything from the start is great. From, the way they kind of sneakily dump in exposition with the tech presentation to, and it works because of how different Paltrow's approach to acting is to Downey's approach, and she's a lot more rigid, but just, miracle that worked out so well for both of those characters, and that they just have so much chemistry. I'm sorry, Matt, I'm talking over you again, but you set me off on something that makes me feel so gleeful.
Oh, no, fine, I'm used to it. Anyway, it's their chemistry. Yeah, we gotta applaud the chemistry and the wordplay between the actors, because they did an incredible job. It felt so tightly knit that it felt like a finished script. I did not know they were working with basically nothing. So it makes this movie even more, like what you said, that lightning in the bottle feel, where in the actual execution of the movie, everything seems so polished, and yet in the background, it is pure chaos. It is like that scene where SpongeBob goes into his head, and he can't. What was it?
He can't remember his name.
He doesn't know his own name. He does. He forgot his own name, and so he just starts wrecking his own brain. Everything's set on fire. It's kind of like that.
I have another thing that I wanna mention before we move on to, and this is me getting a little bit ahead of where we are right now, but like that whole proof that Tony Stark has a heart. When I saw that, I was like, oh, this hurts even more now. Going back to this, because I completely forgot about it, and knowing everything that happens with like, because now we're in a whole different era now that we're getting into the MCU, and dang, it hurt more. It hurt more to see that now going back.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the ups and downs of a serialized story and the attempts to jam the absurd serialization of superhero comics into something like movies, something like film, which is probably about as far from serialized storytelling as you can get typically.
Wait 1 second. Before we continue on, I want to talk about Jensen a little bit, because I feel like he has a little much more
fantastic
than
fantastic.
Please
than we're
go
going
off.
on about, because there's so much to talk about this movie. It means unfortunately Jensen gets overlooked, but he is very important to this movie. He has a large part in basically teaching Tony Stark how to be, how do I say it?
Empathetic.
Yeah, I was supposed to say empathetic.
Humane.
He's the man who has
Humane,
everything
yeah,
and
all
also
those
nothing.
things, all the
Is the
good
line.
adjectives, because from the beginning, he's immediately likable. He gives like very calm dad vibes. He despite the situation he is in, he's very calm, he's very patient, and he's very kind. And he's just so happens to be very smart as well. And he is like a warm fire in winter, because throughout this entire scene, it could be very anxious. They're surrounded by terrorists. They're always under surveillance, but he is always calm. And he is the eye of the storm. And seeing him sacrifice himself, it was really sad. And I believe that Jensen is the reason why Tony Stark appreciates Pepper more, is because I remember during the scene where he's being interrogated, and then Tony steps in and says he's a good assistant. I believe that it has a correlation between him and Pot's relationship, because he never really like appreciated her in the beginning. They obviously do have chemistry, and according to Jake, extreme thick sexual tension.
Are you telling me they don't have sexual tension?
They do. I just wanted to emphasize
So many
your point.
scenes.
Thick sense.
So many
Why
scenes.
just
You mean
read it? Oh my
you mean
God.
every scene?
I'm a sensual being.
Every
Matt.
scene, those two are together.
Well,
Every scene, those two are together. It like oozes sexual tension. It's thicker than Jello. Anyway, I believe
you're
because of his
right.
experience.
Tony Stark goes through a transformation in that cave, and a big part of
Exactly.
that transformation is Jensen. He's
Exactly.
the catalyst.
He is the
turns
catalyst.
him
Yeah.
from the warmonger to the peacemonger.
Jensen's
Exactly.
sacrifice and him telling Tony not to waste his life is maybe my favorite. Like, we'll see if it changes as we watch through it, but it may end up being my favorite moment in the whole MCU, and it comes in the first third of the first movie. Because nothing
That's the
else
thing,
works
though.
without
That's the
it.
thing, is that we're watching this movie. It just makes me appreciate this movie even more, because the payoff of so many scenes in this movie is great, because that's like the benefit of the MCU, is that it doesn't forget, and that so there's so many like callback scenes, and I get that it can be annoying, but it can pay off dividends, which is what we're experiencing right now. Like hearing
When it
Jensen
hits, it
say
hits.
"Don't waste his life" and seeing what he went through the entire MCU, and you can safely say that he didn't waste his life. He lived it to his fullest.
I'd like to hold a vote that Jensen be inducted into the Hall of Him.
Oh, I'll be for that.
That's
Also,
also
like-
I'll vote for that.
I
Also,
I
I want to get
will
one more thing,
make
and I'm
it
also going a little
unanimous.
ahead.
Well, it has
I'm
to
gonna
be
go on
unanimous
ahead.
for him to get in, so
Well,
we're going
he's
Hall
going
of Him
in.
inductee Jensen.
Call him. All right, I'm for
I
that.
brought that back.
But I'm going to say
Out
one more
that
thing
way.
before I move on. And I want to say that they don't talk about how Jensen was the catalyst for Tony to don the suit and basically go attack the terrorists. Because wasn't like the village they were attacking his old village, Jensen's old village?
Yes, it is. It
Yeah.
is Jensen's
Yeah,
village that
exactly.
when he puts on the red suit, like the formal Iron Man suit for the first time, it's Jensen's village.
Mm-hmm. And then
And that's
I'll
another.
get to that scene later, but seeing how Tony reacts to seeing Jensen's village being terrorized is incredible. But I won't get into it now. I'll get to it later.
Well, and another good point. You talk about Jensen being so calm and collected, and he's dealing with the terrorists that attacked his village and killed his family. Now you don't know that until he tells Tony at his unfortunate end there. But he's got to be harboring just a tad bit of resentment towards these terrorists, and yet he's
He leads with love.
calm and yeah, leads with love.
All right. I'm gonna move forward a little bit, especially because I want to talk about Pepperoni and Stain a little more, but we gotta truck along. At a charity event
No.
held by Stark Industries, reporter Christine Everhart, who Tony had previously hooked up with, which is also she throws some shade at Pepper earlier in the movie, and Pepper says something about taking out the trash, and it's great. Informs Stark that the company's weapons were recently delivered to the Ten Rings and are being used to attack Jensen's home village, Gamira, as Matt was talking about. So Tony dons the Iron Man suit for the first time, flies to Afghanistan where he saves the villagers and leaves the one guy there for them to do with what they will. He on his way back, he's attacked by two F-22 Raptors, and which Rhodey's on the call with, and he reveals to Rhodey that it's him, that it's a suit, and that he's in it in order to try to evade the attack. So meanwhile, the Ten Rings gathered pieces of Stark's prototype suit and meet up with Stain, who had been trafficking arms to them the whole time, and who had arranged for Stark's capture and attempted murder in the first place in order to replace Stark as the head of Stark Industries, seeing him as just this entitled, nepotism thing. Obviously, don't murder people, but you see where that came from. Anyway. So he subdues and kills Raza, the leader of the Ten Rings, and has him and the rest of the group killed. Stain makes his own massive new suit reverse engineered from the wreckage, and seeking to track his company's illegal shipments, Stark sends Pepper to hack into the Stark Industries database, where there's a very tense scene in Stain's office as she tries to download the files. And I've seen this movie several times, and it still has me tense watching. It's really well acted by Paltrow and Bridges. She discovers that Stain had hired the Ten Rings to kill Tony, but that the group reneged on the deal when they realized they had a direct route to start making weapons for them. Potts finally meets with Agent Phil Coulson of S.H.I.E.L.D., an intelligence agency, to inform him of Stain's activities. So, first and foremost, a lot of people talk about like this era of Marvel movies as having weak villains, and that's like largely, and usually people point out Loki is the exception, and I mostly agree with that, but I also think Stain is a pretty strong villain. I think Bridges is a really, really just like powerful, intimidating performance to the point of like when he's rolling on like a moped with a cigar and yelling people about Tony built this in a cave with box of scraps. Like he is not someone that I like want to be in a room with.
Yeah, I'll agree with that because Jeff Bridges as Ironmonger is very intimidating. He has that air of just tension when he's in the same room as you, and you can't explain it, but you know things won't go well if you stay around this man. And then he just continues to prove that point as, his plan unravels as the movie goes along. He is a very good villain. He is very intimidating. I don't think he's like the best villain, but he is. I don't want to say serviceable either because he is not serviceable. I would say he's a good villain. He's a good villain.
I also like that at the very least, even if like he's obviously evil, and the whole entire point is I want to hate him. They make him a likable person to hate for one thing because he's just so intimidating, and Jeff Bridges really drives the performance with that. Also, just the fact that it's like from a skewed point of view. If I take out all the bad things he did from at some angle, I can see why he wants to do what he wants to do, and why he sees things the way that he does. Because, like, realistically, he was Howard's Was he Howard's friend? It was Howard's friend, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
he was friends with Howard and was like,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know exactly where he came from, but he quote unquote earned his way up compared to Tony, who was just born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of like I understand the jealousy of it, and also just the idea of like this nepo baby essentially taking over a company that should
Yeah.
have been yours to begin with.
Good looking
And not
guy,
just
too.
that,
He
that
has an
nepotism baby is a
understandable
total
motive.
prick.
He just does unforgivable things for that motive. And I would agree that he's also one of Marvel's better villains, especially early on. As much as he's maybe not the most intricate character as a villain, he does serve his purpose. And in a movie like this, where the main focus is really the origin and the character arc of Tony, you don't need the super strong villain there. You just kind of need a counterpart, and he does that better than I can ask for, honestly. Jeff Bridges, he's the dude.
Well, that's the thing though. It's like I'm trying to see where the strength comes from Ironmonger. No, I'm trying to like decipher like whether like the presence of Ironmonger is it's actually, you know what? Never mind. I just concluded it in my head because Jeff Bridges really takes Ironmonger up a level. Because
What?
like he's not just one dimensional. He is not just evil for the sake of being evil. He has dimensions to his character. They are very selfish ambitions, right? They're very selfish reasons for being evil, but they are still, layers to his character.
Well,
And
I
then
agree because
Jeff Bridges is also very charismatic. He's also very charismatic. And then he can pull you in as easily as intimidate you. And so I think that that gives Ironmonger a very, very good edge on a lot of other villains.
Well, I like that he plays him friendly too, because one of the things I noted on this viewing was just that I think a lot of times when you have a villain that's like, it's not like the movie they keep super under wraps. I don't think it's necessarily hard to see coming that Stain is bad, even if you're not familiar with like Iron Man. But even when you see it coming, Stain doesn't play it. No, like I've seen so many movies where like the villain is so mustache twirly that it's like, how does the character like I can't buy that the protagonist does not see it coming a mile away that they're evil. And like Tony doesn't necessarily trust Stain, but he doesn't trust him because he knows Stain still wants to make weapons. But like I completely believe why Tony has like no suspicions that Stain is more nefarious than that. I think he plays things very in this like kind of jovial manner. Even in that scene I mentioned that I really like with Pepper in the office, he's not like actually like it's just his like pure stature that he carries that makes him intimidating. But the way he's talking and the things he's saying, it's just like it's not even coded language. He's just having a conversation with Pepper, but he knows, and he's
Mm-hmm.
carrying himself in a way where it's like you can't read him quite right. But man, is he imposing?
Oh yeah, I could definitely
Right.
relate to that. Also, he also plays off Tony Stark pretty well. Like their chemistry is so good. Every time those two interact, they interact like people that have known each other for years. Like a perfect example is after Tony's test flight, that interaction between him and Tony about the board meeting, right? And how I remember there was a scene that I remember where how Tony won't let Obadiah see what he's making, and as soon as Obadiah hears that, he's like, "Okay, then you can't have the pizza." But then as Tony's walking away, he was like, "But you can have a slice." Like those kind of interactions, those type of interactions, while they don't like exactly hide his intentions, you can see why Tony won't suspect him. It's because they have good chemistry together. They are people who have known each other for years, and they play it like that.
Well, I think one of the things that makes him a good villain is he thinks he's doing the right thing. And that's a big part of what makes a good villain. It's I'm not evil. I'm doing what's right. What we do is we sell weapons. Both Jake and Matt, you mentioned specifically where Tony shows he doesn't quite trust Obi. He won't show him what he's tinkering with. At the same time, Tony shows he trusts Rhodey. At one point, right after he starts to tell the story about Rhodey hooking up with Ivan, which I think is a foreshadow there's two foreshadows to Iron Man 2.
Ivan.
Ivan is the guy that Rhodey almost hooks up with, and the call signs of the Raptors are Whiplash 1 and 2.
That's funny.
But that aside, he thinks he's good, but yeah, right after he says he wants to show Rhodey what he's working on, and Rhodey's like, nah, nah, it's better if I don't know. So he trusts Rhodey, but he instinctively doesn't trust Obi. Now, I don't know if you guys remember watching it the first time. Like, I know Obadiah Stane was going to be the villain because I read the comics and he was a villain in the comics. I don't know if you guys thought, like, if it signaled real quick that he was the villain, or if you thought he was just, an old.
I remember being aware, but I don't know if it was because I had already had that information through your old comics, or if I just, like I said, like I don't think it's necessarily like hated by the movie as much as it just shows why Tony wouldn't jump to this guy tried to kill me.
So another thing I found out about too, just because you guys brought up the jealousy thing. Obviously, he took over the company when Tony was young, and then had to give up control. And in the scene where Tony walks in and Obadiah is kind of tinkering at the piano, he's actually playing a song or a instrumental that was written by a contemporary of Mozart's, who had to deal with the fact that he was just a tad bit overshadowed by Mozart,
Oh,
who was also a child genius. So that was kind of now I didn't know that offhand. That's just something I found out about when I was doing my homework, but I
well,
thought it
good
was
for you.
interesting.
Interesting.
That's cool. That's a cool night. That's a nice touch. I didn't know that. I don't know anything about music history. Yeah, I mean, I think he's great, and then I mean, you can't talk about him without also talking about Pepper and Rhodey and like the trust you were just mentioning, and that like you feel like there's a friendship there. I think Sean was the one who said it earlier. You feel like there's history there, or maybe it was Matt. But either way, I mean, that's true. It doesn't feel like awkward for a second, and it's the type of thing that like you can see they're also both so different than Tony that you can see why he keeps them around and why they're good for him. Because I think like anybody should be in anybody's life, you should try to keep some friends in your circle that you may have share certain core values or whatever, but that are just like different personalities and different egos, and because it levels you off. Like I know there's certainly like plenty of people for me that's the case. And I think this is like a really good example in that these people get to be normal people. They get to be civilians, which is something I enjoy because I know we won't always get to see civilians in these things. And you really get to feel why they're a positive impact on Tony, as much of a headache for them as he is.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Well said.
All right. I'm going to wrap up the plot here, but really it's like, not necessarily wrap up the conversation just because. Again, I think one of the movie's strong suits is its simplicity. Man trapped in cave has a change of heart about making weapons after escaping. And the way the movie flows so smoothly, it's like you're in a cave and the next thing you know he's Iron Man, but it doesn't feel rushed. Um so it concludes with Stane's scientists can't duplicate the miniaturized arc reactor, so Stane ambushes Stark in his home and steals the one from his chest. Stark manages to replace it with his original arc reactor that Potts had saved, with the help of his robot arm dummy. So Pepper and several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents attempt to arrest Stane, but he dons the suit first and attacks them. Stark fights Stane, but is outmatched without his new arc reactor to run the suit at full capacity. Recalling an issue he had from an earlier test flight in the suit that caused the suit to freeze in the upper atmosphere, which he has since fixed but knows Stane will be unaware of, Tony guides the fight into the sky, causing the Ironmonger suit to crash. Both Tony and Stark fall from the sky onto the top of the Stark Industries building, where Stark instructs Potts to overload the large arc reactor powering the building, despite her objections that it will kill him. This unleashes a massive electrical surge that causes Stane and his armor to fall into the exploding reactor, killing him. The next day at a press conference, Tony, despite being instructed otherwise by S.H.I.E.L.D., publicly admits to being the superhero the press have dubbed Iron Man, simply saying, "I am Iron Man." In a post-credit scene, S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury visits Stark at his home, telling him that Iron Man is not the only superhero in the world, and explaining that he wants to discuss the Avengers Initiative. I mean, talking about the climax, I, I think the action in the movie is really good too. It's not like all time great or anything, but there's really no bad moments. I think it's a little bit comical when Tony does his a little bit vengish mission in Jensen's hometown, but the cave escape is thrilling. And then Brendan this like natural humor with it, with like his arm getting stuck as he's wearing the suit for the first time. And then the fight with Stain, it ends a little anticlimactic, I guess. But as a whole, I like, two giant suits hitting each other is fun.
Yeah, the one thing I love is how much the impact has during any of the action scenes with like any of the suits. They all feel like they're hitting so hard, especially when like you see him punching people and they go flying, or like you have Stain and him going at it and they're like absolutely able to like throw each other through walls and stuff, and you can feel the impact. It's not like, again, it's not like the greatest choreographed fights, but they're like really good still, and like you just get all the impact of the fights.
Yeah, like they said, it's not the best action, but two metal suits with laser beams that can fly is kind of tried and true. It's like a grilled cheese sandwich, is you can't mess it up. And they didn't mess it up, and I would say they did better than not messed it up. They did great. Swell. The action was great. And I loved the little callback to the icing issue. I thought that was some cute full circle bullshit.
Hey, good movie.
That's a
Well,
great way of putting it, Jason.
I think everybody's overlooking the real hero in this story, and that is the robot that Tony verbally abuses throughout the movie, who then hands him his original miniaturized arc reactor as he's almost expired on the floor and comes through big time.
That's
I
a
also
real
want
love
to
that
point
weird
out,
little bit.
That's a real
I think
homie.
it's kind of a dynamic there with, in a sense, at the end he's fighting himself. Warmonger representing the old Tony, and Iron Man representing the new Tony, going at it. If there's one knock, and this is just me being picayune, is, he tells Pepper, go down there, flip a couple switches, hit the button when I tell you. First of all, I find it hard to believe they'd have an arc reactor made to blow up the button. It's like typically what you want to do is make a button shut it down.
Nah, Tony Stark's he's on 40 chess.
And when she goes down there, she starts flipping switches like she's an electrical engineer. She knows exactly the 37 switches she needs to hit.
She's built different.
That's
I
very
understand.
true.
I'm not saying she's dumb, but
She's built different.
she's built nicely.
She's
But,
clutch.
Oh, she is built
but
nicely.
she comes through at the end.
Well,
So
okay.
that's okay. I guess the other things I want to mention is two big themes I think that come out of this movie from him is peace. You'll hear him refer to that time and again. Peace in our time. I just want peace throughout the whole of the MC Infinity Saga. And I am not a hero. He constantly, I'm not the guy that's going to fall on the wire. I'm going to cut it. I'm not a hero. And yet, that's exactly what he is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to his character a lot because, I mean, when a character has that level of ego, when a person has that level of ego, there's insecurity there. And you can see that even before he's, quote unquote, not necessarily religiously, but quote unquote, born again after the cave with Yinsen. Even before then, you can see the insecurities. And that's, why they only really float around it in these movies, but his substance abuse issues, which is obviously something that Downey can pull from in real life. And I know he wanted them to pull from it more than they did in these movies. But I think that it just kind of transfers from self-punishment into he doesn't want to see himself as a hero no matter how much he is, but he's still outwardly trying to do better rather than just retreating and giving up as he did in his previous life. And then you laugh about Dummy, but I think that's like the heart of the movie is Dummy, and then people like Happy Hogan and people like Rhodey and Pepper that are like long past their date, then nobody would fault them if they had given up on this friendship, given up on Tony. But he never gets out of that cave. Like he dies from the explosion if Yinsen doesn't save his heart, but then he also doesn't get out of that cave without Yinsen. And if Rhodey doesn't find him in the desert, it's very key that Rhodey is with that team in the desert, and it's not just random military people. And Pepper performs open heart surgery on him, pretty much saves his life. There's a line about him not being able to tie his shoes without her, or something to the effect. But that there's a million cases in the movie where Tony just doesn't make it to the end of the scene probably, and he probably would have drunk himself to death before he even got attacked in the first place if those people weren't in his life. It's the little people, for all his genius, that he does not have any success without that. So that's really key to it, and they're a highlight.
Yeah, he's a total mess. Like in the beginning of the movie, you don't really see him outside unless he's indulging in something, whether that be gambling in women or drinking. So he's definitely not a mature person, to say the least.
Oh god, the line where he's like, "Give me a scotch, I'm starving."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Now, let's not get it twisted. There's nothing wrong with drinking in women.
No, it's just overindulgence on them.
Yes.
Everything in moderation,
Yes.
Not women.
including moderation.
One thing I loved about this...
No, fuck you.
Kill yourself.
This is gonna be a fun part to edit.
Yes, give more work for Jake.
Yes.
My thing's...
You wanna go,
My thing's
Jason?
not that important, but I'll say it. I just loved the part where Pepper Potts walked in on Tony Stark listening to Suicidal Tendencies. That was one of my favorite parts.
Oh, I thought
Were
you
you
were going to
about to
talk
say
about
Tony
that you walked
Stank?
in on me doing worse thing.
Yeah,
Well-
that's what I thought you were going
you
with.
No,
walked
that
in on
was
me
a
doing work.
fantastic line, but no, she walked in and he was listening to Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies, which was not something I realized when I was 6 and watching this movie, but as someone who listens to punk bands now, it was funny.
That's a good point. Yeah, again, the four of us really grew up through a lot of these movies. And I know a lot of people view the MCU and what it's done as harm for cinema, and I pretty much agree with pretty much anything that's been said in that regard. But for me, it was a gateway into like, oh my god, I love going to the movies. Let me watch more stuff. Let me watch more diverse art from different creators. So it had a really positive impact on me, and I'm looking forward to kind of revisiting that as we go.
Well, you guys grew up on these movies, whereas I grew down, I guess. I grew young again watching these movies.
Aw.
All the
Look
all
at
the
that.
comic book movies that they just couldn't make when I was your age and younger, obviously. And
Large
now they
homie
do.
grew-
So, yeah.
Large
the
homie grew into
nostalgia
tiny
just-
homie.
His heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Yeah, let's not get crazy.
Well,
No, I was just saying, it's like a nostalgia overload for me to watch these movies.
I mean, it's crazy because it's kind of taken for granted now. But when this movie came out, it was a risk. Cinematic universes are so overdone now to the point of we're trying to make them out of everything, which is dumb. But at the time, it was like you're gonna try to make something out of Iron Man with this guy who's washed up. And it's easy to forget that until you like go back and watch it. And you're like, wow, they actually really did have something special on this one.
The other thing I wanted to mention too that we didn't really talk about was how like I can only compare this to like recent MCU movies, so like we'll get to it eventually. It's gonna be a while, but like things like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and like versus this, where like you have a genuine feel of like everything here is shot on a location. I feel like
They're not using the fucking
everything-
volume.
I feel like everything in the scene is tangible, and like everything's there, and like if they're in a room, I can tell where they are in the room and what the room is like, and there's like a tangible feeling to where they are and what they're doing, and like the set and how every item in there plays around and how it's designed. But like in more recent movies, with a lot of it being like set within like whether it be a blue screen setting or like I forget what the other one was. There's like it starts with a V. I can't remember what it is, but like where they have these setups that are just you have a person in a room with like objects that aren't actually there, and they're gonna edit it in later in post. It does kind of like this does going back to this. It does have a bit of a better feel to it when watching these scenes of everybody like interacting and just within a location.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I totally meant to talk about that. So thank you for not letting us go without because this was from an era. Not that movies can look beautiful not filmed on film, filmed digitally, but these first few MCU movies were put on film, and you can definitely see post Avengers as they got away to pure digital. The visual quality I think start to dip, and the over reliance on we'll fix it. Let's shoot for coverage and fix it in post, and not actually have any sets. I like the chunk of the. We were talking about the suits earlier. I like the fact that I know some of it's CG, some of it's over top, but I like the like chunk of the suit because it feels like there's actually a suit there and it's not just a cartoon character.
Yeah, I
And the shot
completely agree.
composition.
I completely agree. I have very, very strong feelings about the fact that most things are shot on green screen and edited in post now. I think it's just fucking dumb. Because it's most of the time, it's like there'll be movies where it's like they're sitting in a bar and the entire bar is green screen. And it's like, fucking bars exist. Just go film in one, jackasses.
It's very dis. Sorry, Trungo.
Oh, I was gonna say, I also have seen situations, I forget what movie it was, but somebody had made the mention of, like, there was a scene that looked like it was shot at this place, and all of it was CGI. So there are times where it can look really good if you give it the time and do it right and want to actually take that route, perhaps for artistic purposes or whatever. But it's one of those things where it shouldn't be something that's reliant in this case, and I guess you could argue that the MCU is a telltale sign of like where you shouldn't go if you want to like compare it to later on, but again we'll get into that later. But like it's just one of those things where it's like
It's just so
the other
overused.
thing I know, yeah, it's just so overused. And like the one thing I will mention too, in that like I hate that I'm comparing things to like older MCU things, but that's all I can really compare it to because like we have so much to go off of now. But like seeing like the Iron Man suits and having them feel like Jake said, solid, and you get the chunk from it like closing and it being like this tangible thing that's there, as opposed to like later on you'll see like Tony has like a nanotech suit and it like just magically appears on him,
And then everyone has one.
yeah, and then everyone has one, and it's like I do to a degree miss that like practical feel to the way, whether it be CGI or not, I miss that practical feel to the way that like the suits are and like the way that certain objects, items, and weapons and stuff are to the characters. I like feeling that like you're something that maybe it's a fantastical element of a movie, but like at the very least I can tell that it's like real and it's there and it's not just a magical it appears on me. It's like an actual suit or something. And obviously in later scenes you can see that like some of these things are actual like real suits that they're wearing, but it's still like having like that weird nanotech stuff, I guess, in later ones, or just having like these suits appear, it really does take away from it. So like I love seeing like Tony and this just suit up and like see how like the suit comes together. It's kind of like watching like old Transformer stuff and watching them transform from like a vehicle into a transformer, and just like how did they make that transition look, and how does it like what part becomes what later on. It's just kind of neat to see those practical ideas come into play, especially with like again like the suits.
Yeah, I think this is a case of Hollywood learning the wrong lesson because we talked about how a lot this movie didn't have a finished script. A lot of this movie was like come up with it as we go, and that was a little bit out of necessity. But I think they looked at that and thought, oh, we can turn this into a system, and became. And I don't want to get too lost in the weeds on myself. You guys can say what you want, but I know I'll go on endlessly if I don't limit myself. But things like green screens, blue screens, the volume are wonderful tools for filmmaking. But when you're just saying, hey, let's not consider what the shot's saying, let's just throw everybody in the center of a sound stage and figure it out later because we don't actually know where the scene's set yet, and we don't even know what they're wearing yet, so we're going to CGI the clothes too. And we don't really put any thought into, we don't want you to really worry about putting thought into who's standing where and what these things convey. It becomes such a detriment, and that's where you start to see why a lot of people get quote unquote like poisoned against this stuff, and why I can't fault people for it. But for the time being, like I do think it's not like some astoundingly beautiful movie, but it's just kind of nice to go back and be like, oh wait, there was a time where there was definitely a lot more filmmaking put into the production, and I think it got a little off the rails, and I hope at some point maybe they can get back on.
Yeah,
and
I totally agree with everything you just said, because the thing about this movie was that I was so surprised by just how practical a lot of the shots are. Like, for example, like Tony Stark's test flights. All of those were practical. Of course, there were like added effects to the hands and to the boots, but him like floating in the air, all of that was practical. And then there are times where the suit that he wears is also practical. And then they blend that in with very well done CGI. It's kind of like what I like to call the Jurassic Park effect, where they'll introduce a CGI element but mix in practical effects to blend the two to make it real in your head. And I feel like this movie does it perfectly. Especially like even when the scenes where it's obviously CGI, like for example, his first like actual suit up scene with the hot rod Iron Man suit, it's like perfectly rotoscoped to his head. Like you can see like how the metal, you can see how like the like metal has like tiny movements that follow Tony's head, and so even though you know it's CGI, you can believe it's real. And it's kind of sad that the CGI of a movie from 2008 is, I'm not even going to say subjectively, I'm going to say objectively better than a lot of MCU movies nowadays.
Studios fault, not the artists. Just throwing that out there. I know,
Yeah.
Oh, you know that too, Matt. I just want to put that out there.
Oh no,
so
that's
we don't.
perfectly fine.
There's a lot of people that
That's perfectly.
don't. You know.
Yeah. That's a good point because it's perfectly valid because the artist has no control nowadays. Like it's so
they're
weird
getting
to see
told
this
2 weeks
now.
before release. Like we want you to change this entirely.
Yeah, it
I mean, like
sucks.
it's one of those things too. Like, sorry to jump in, Matt, but like,
I'm used to it.
Since we're talking about it, like you see like so much CGI used as a tool, and like here you see it so good when it's used as a tool, and you can look at movies like more recent ones. Like I bring this up because it's not the greatest movie, but it's a good movie. Like the creator. Where it just looks beautiful, and like a good portion of that was CGI, and it's still like such a beautiful movie and was made on such a small budget, but people were given the time and resources and yada yada yada. Just an idea.
Yeah, at this point I feel like people are, well, I can't say more aware because I feel like a lot of people don't know or aren't aware, but I feel like a good amount of people know that the CGI from like nowadays, like it's a tool, right? And no matter how much money you put into it, if you rush it, it's going to look bad. Like people keep saying, why does Jurassic Park still look good? It's because they took their time. They took their time making these dinosaurs as realistic as possible, making them move as realistic as possible. And so it pays off dividends. It's basically animation. That's what CGI is. You can't rush it. If you rush animation, it's going to look bad because you're going to have to take shortcuts.
There's 2 things. Unless y'all have more to say, stop me. Before we go to final thoughts that I think we'd be remiss about not talking about rather. And that's the I Am Iron Man declaration and the post-credit scene. Obviously, post-credit scenes being something that became a bit of a genre trope, and obviously, specifically within the MCU, like mega franchise, a big part of it. But for me, starting with I Am Iron Man, I think that's kind of the perfect ending because it's a declaration that to this point in superhero movies, the Fantastic Four movies are the only ones that have really had heroes with public identities and heroes in the limelight. And so this kind of flips audience expectations on its head. One, because in the comics for a long time, Tony did have a secret identity, and the story was that Iron Man was his bodyguard. So people familiar with that may be expecting it, but people also expecting it, I think, at the time because that was the norm. You think about like even the ones that aren't like the X-Men movies where it's not like necessarily a focus that they have secret identities, that school's hidden and it's not really necessarily public that they're all mutants. I guess Howard the Duck doesn't have a secret identity, but I don't know if that counts. So I think this was like a really good subversion of what people would expect, and because of that, it kind of puts you in a situation where you're off guard. And not only does it fit Tony as a character who's like erratic and unpredictable, and also has like the ego and wants that attention, but it immediately leaves you going like, well, what's next? It's the type of thing that like a lot of the times, like I'm enjoying this watch through with you guys, but as soon as I watched this, I was like, sometimes I'm like, okay, that was good. I don't need to roll. I'm kind of like, oh, I'm going to roll into the next one because even if I've seen it before, and it definitely gave me a similar feeling back in 2008 as a 10-year-old. So I think it's the perfect ending.
Yeah, I agree. And then it goes perfectly into the Black Sabbath song, which is an incredible song. Which, fun fact, beginning of that song, vocal effect that they use on Ozzy's voice to make it sound like a robot was created using a metal fan that they had in the studio.
That's funny.
That's very funny.
That's cool to know.
Now that you say that, it seems obvious.
Yeah, like I
Yeah,
guess that
once
makes
you
sense.
hear it, once
We've
you
all done
hear
that
that,
before.
We've
you're
all
like,
done it.
oh shit, it does sound
I've
like
done
that.
that.
That was K
My
through
goodness.
12. Every time there was a fan in the classroom.
I just want to say something real quick. It's just so weird after like over a
Touch that out.
decade of these Marvel movies, going back to the original is like it's like whiplash, because I don't know, because I remember how good Iron Man was, but it's different between remembering and actually like witnessing how good it is, and how this kickstarted an ultimate like a humongous franchise,
I'm not doing it.
and how a lot of things like the formula and the humor used in future Marvel movies stem from this movie, but it does it the best. Like arguably, it does it the best.
Okay, I don't know how much of this background noise I'm keeping in because I want to make sure people hear Matt's points because Matt was cooking. But my dad immediately got up and grabbed the box fan in my apartment because he's recording in person with me and like turned it up to its highest speed and is trying to recreate it. And I'm losing my mind.
I thought I was
heard it
tripping.
and then just started
That's gotta
laughing.
be- That's gotta be again. Like I don't know what I can keep in and still because I don't want to distract from that. But that's gotta be like top 5 podcast moments.
That was
I literally
some
thought I was
weird
going
noises
insane.
and I wasn't
I literally
sure
thought
what
I
was
was going
going
insane.
on.
noises, and I was like, "What's that?" And then I listened closer.
He's going, I am
I
Iron
listened
Man.
just a little closer, and I heard what he was saying, and
I'm
I
also-
just
I'm
started
also pretty sure he
laughing.
ripped
I don't
one at
know if
one
you guys
point.
could hear me laughing, but I just started laughing, and I was trying to keep it quiet because Matt was talking.
You know, funny
Um,
enough,
anyway,
I thought someone
I'm
was
sorry,
watching the
Matt.
movie just to refresh their points. That's what I thought was happening. I was like, why am I hearing I am Iron Man in the background? Am I going insane?
No, it's so good. Anyway, yeah, I mean, you guys like the ending, I guess. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Ending good? Good guy win?
I'm trying to remember if back in the day when we first saw this, if I like remember, none of us stayed. Did any of us stay for like the after credit scene?
Oh yeah, because I didn't see it right away, and at that time, people knew, so I would have seen it with my dad and with Jason, and I remember you telling us, I heard there's something there's some kind of scene at the like, if you stick around, and we stuck around and we did, and then never looked back.
Which it's just such a neat thing to see that this is where that kind of like started. And like the one thing I love about this one is that it's so the post-credit scene here is so genuinely worth like staying for, because it's like an oh shit, they're trying to make something out of this without like knowing as a kid to like hear that like, oh, they want to do the Avengers. Oh boy. Like it gives me that giddy, excited feeling of like being a kid again.
Well, this whole movie just gave me that feeling, because this is one of like the first movies I can recollect going to the theaters for and like being genuinely excited. Like this movie was incredible to experience in the theater. And
Yeah,
that's
that
all I have
buzz
to
was
say.
strong. The word of mouth was strong. Because again, this was at a point where like they weren't slam dunks at the box office either. Like the second Fantastic Four, the movie becoming right before this was a flop. Superman Returns had flopped. They were hit or miss both quality and in terms of like for the studios for profiting. And but this post credit scenes rarely, if ever, are going to make a difference in the movie's quality because they're just little teasers. They're whatever. It's not like the core of the movie, and definitely shouldn't be. But something like this to me is like the ideal because it was a genuine surprise, but it had iconography with it of like I could still like I can close my eyes and picture the shot of Nick Fury walking out of the shadows in Tony's home, and then like the feeling that came with that. And I think like when you have an actor of the stature and the recognition of someone like Samuel L. Jackson, even if you don't know about, like, even if you're going to this because it was just like the big summer blockbuster and not because you're like read Iron Man comics or whatever, you can just like feel like this is important if it's Samuel L. Jackson. And even if you're someone like you're a kid and you're unaware of him and you're unaware of Shield, you just go away at just, this guy with such gravitas walking out of the shadows and saying, "You're not the only one. I want to talk to you about this initiative." Is so like, whoa, and it whets your palate for what could and what end up coming. But it's simple, it's mysterious, it's surprising, but it doesn't like distract or negate anything that happened in the core 2 hours of film.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree. And Samuel L. Jackson is always phenomenal. No
Yeah, I
matter
mean, you gotta
how much
shout
or
out
how
that
little
motherfucker.
he is in a movie.
Like nowadays,
I mean,
it
you
just
guys.
happens so often. But man, it was weird having after credit scenes because when you catch them, there was like an immediate sense of satisfaction because you feel like there was there was a reward for sitting through the credits. Now it's just expected, and
Yeah,
I,
it
I
does
kind
feel
of
like
miss that
maybe it would be
feeling.
revitalized. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I just said how I kind of miss that feeling because
Yeah,
now
I
it's
think it'd be
expected.
revitalizing if they weren't always there. Okay.
Yeah,
All right, are y'all ready? Are y'all ready to do our favorites, our least favorites, or what would you recommend to wrap up?
Yes.
Nobody speak.
sure.
Okay, well, look, I sure as fuck recommend this movie. Robert Downey Jr. is obviously the best part. I feel like we surprisingly didn't even talk about him that much, but it's like, what can be said about him in his role that hasn't been said ad nauseum for the last like decade and a half? The dude's perfect for it. He's meant for it. The supporting cast is great too. I think Gwyneth Paltrow is also perfect as Pepper. She perfectly offsets him. I think Jeff Bridges is great. Clark Gregg as Coulson's a classic, but Robert Downey Jr. is the heart and soul of this movie, and this like movie that they pulled out of their ass would not have worked without him. I got to be the greatest superhero casting of all time. And I don't know if you guys think it's premature, but I would say he's in the Hall of Him as well. Um, Least favorite thing, like I said, I mean, I guess like the staying dying from hitting the button on the Switch is not like super exciting. I don't know. I mean, it's not bad. I'm kind of grasping at straws. I don't think this is some like masterful movie, but I also don't think there's really any glaring issues with it. And it's kind of just it, you forget how like simple but also like original feeling in the context of the genre it was when until you've watched everything that came before it because it's so easy to lose it in the mix now. But I definitely recommend it. If especially just for the performance of Robert Downey Jr. as Tony.
Yeah, I also wholeheartedly recommend it. I agree with everything Jake said. Robert Downey Jr. is perfect. I also think the design of the Iron Man suit is amazing. As a 6-year-old, I thought it was cool as shit, and I still think it looks cool, so shout out to the costume design and visual effects department for that. It looks sick, and it still looks sick all these years later. So, aged well, shout out to them. My least favorite part was the fact that I had to fucking hear AC/DC during this movie. Because they're top 5 worst all time. Without a doubt.
Wow.
Damn.
I fucking
He's
hate
already
it.
spitting.
Them,
He's
you know who? You know what? You know why I hate them is they fall into a category of music that I hate so much, which is rock music that's just about being rock music. You know what I mean?
Sure, kid.
Like all of their music
Sure,
is just about making rock music.
I'm sorry, I just thought of something completely unrelated.
It infuriates
Share
me.
it
I
with the
also
class,
hate Kiss. Anyway,
I also hate kids.
well, that too. Go on.
Who are you telling to go on to?
I don't know. I've done my final thoughts. Whoever's next. Whoever wants to go next. I don't
Matt?
give a fuck.
I guess I'm up. So, of course I recommend this movie. Even if I said I won't recommend this movie, that's a blatant lie. And I can't do that to myself. So,
Okay.
yes,
Or the
I do
listeners.
recommend this movie. This movie is absolutely incredible for just everything. The performance, the story. There's nothing really wrong with this movie. The only really thing that can offend you is if it offends your music tastes, like Jason here.
Yeah,
But for
that's
me-
why I said that, because it's like I was grasping at straws for at least favorite.
Exactly. And honestly, I can't really complain about anything. I love this movie. It's paced really, really well. All the performances are great. the practical effects. The practical effects are incredible, and I feel like we haven't talked about that enough. But there's just too much to talk about this movie, so I give it a pass. And there's just nothing to complain about. This movie is still the standard. In fact, it's still probably top 5 Marvel movie, despite being the first one, which I don't know if that's sad or if it just reflects the state of the MCU, but you know what? I'm not going to get into that now. This movie's great. Go watch it if you haven't.
I am gonna amend my least favorite to there being no Don Cheadle. Sorry, Sean. Continue.
That's fair.
That is a fair statement. Definitely recommend it. I want to obviously like my favorite thing is like Robert Downey Jr., but like also I'd say like it definitely goes to the performances, because especially now knowing the situation of them not having a script at all, it just makes the fact that Downey was able to just kill it with the whole thing, and then have every supporting actor also just on top of that kill it to make it so much better and elevate it just a little bit more, is genuinely impressive. And like to see that from this movie and to go back and just feel how great everybody fits into their roles is fantastic. Least favorite thing? I don't really know. Like, I mean, I guess it still falls into the role of like hero fights themselves, but this one has a more thematic element to it for like the reason of him fighting himself, so I wouldn't say that. I guess like it's hard to think of like a least favorite thing, because this one's
No Don Cheadle. No Don
yeah,
Cheadle.
we'll just give it to no Don Cheadle, because honestly it's jarring. It's jarring going back. I want Don Cheadle.
Yeah, it's tough to pick a least favorite, because like, not that this is like the best movie of all time, it's just that there's not that much wrong with it.
There really
It's
isn't
just
nothing like lags.
like a rock solid movie. It's like Ryan Tannehill.
Rock solid. If you know, you know.
If you know, rock solid Ryan, shouts out.
All right, how about our guest, our first ever guest?
Well, look, I think you guys hit on them, all the things that made it great. I mean, the bottom line is this is the iconic MCU movie. If they don't hit it out of the park, the rest of this may not happen. I mean, you can't look into the what if world, but
Oh,
reality is,
wouldn't be a dad guest star.
but it's everything that follows, good and bad, but a lot of the great stuff that followed in the Infinity Saga does not happen, or probably does not happen if this movie doesn't hit it out of the park, and it certainly does. Now I'm going to be a little more my least favorite. I'm gonna cheat a little on this, and that's the Ten Rings. They were setting us up for Iron Man's big villain, and they fell flat. Now I know that the falling flat happened in later movies, but that's the disappointment. Every time I hear them say Ten Rings, I kind of just shake my head and on what didn't happen. My favorite part, this is the child in me. I was growing up, watched a lot of cowboy and Indian movies, and yes, there were cowboy and Indian movies when I was a kid, not cowboy and Native American movies, and in many of them it was the scene where the cavalry comes into the rescue. And so I'm a big fan of that scene, and then that scene here is his first Iron Man scene. Stop laughing at me. The first Iron Man scene when he comes in and saves the villagers at the last second, and he's blowing all those guys away with the repulsor rays, and then the other guys are holding him hostage, and he kind of just stops. Looks like he's checkmated until his computer scan identifies all the targets, and then he just boom pops them, and they're done. And then of course he pulls the other guy out through the wall, and he's all yours.
I can't believe you found a cavalry arriving thing in this, because I know you love that. I know that's your favorite thing, and I was like, this doesn't really happen in this, but apparently I was wrong.
Yeah, that's
He's the
so
cavalry.
funny.
He's the cavalry, and he saves the villagers.
That's so.
This was so quintessential.
That's the
I do want to
funniest
say
fucking thing. Dad
thank
always
you
finds
for-
a way to talk about the cavalry.
I do.
I
wanna
didn't know
thank you
this was
for
his
having me
thing.
as a guest.
Thanks for being on.
And
The pleasure is
you know,
ours.
I won't beg. I won't
Yes.
beg to be a guest again for a while because I know you probably have other people to bring on. Eat your heart out, Haley. I beat you here, but I do hope I can get a return invite at some point.
We can be in discussion. But
Keep in touch.
thank you for being on. I take it you recommend. We all recommend the movie, right?
Without a doubt.
This is our first ever 5 for 5 on Rex.
Yeah.
So
Impressive.
thanks
and-
to Alo. One second, we're gonna pull this up live. Alo changed his ad again. I want to get it right.
Oh, did he?
But yeah, thanks to Alo for the podcast artwork. It's Alo Fett now, as in Boba Fett, ALOFETT. Thanks to Jason for our music, and again before I'm out, thanks Dad for being our first ever guest. I love you, and it's been a blast.
Pleasure was all mine.
You gonna plug your music, Jason?
Oh
and
shit!
dead air?
Sorry, my bad. I fucking
I
forgot
huge and
that's what-
everything.
My bad.
Leaving that
Okay,
in.
yeah. Shit, no, sorry. I'm stupid. I'm not gonna explain myself.
Pulling your pud over there.
Yeah, I'm pulling my pud. Sorry. So I make music. I'm working on some music. It's gonna be coming out very soon. I promise. Matt, don't say a fucking word. That being said, follow me on Twitter at _upsides_PA, on Instagram _upsides_PA, and the Upsides on SoundCloud. And also, shoplifting is a victimless crime.
Shout
All
out
for
to
small
all the
businesses.
shoplifters.
Actually, it's more the small businesses. When they raise their prices, it affects the neighborhood, the very poor neighborhoods that those businesses are.
I'm saying don't shoplift from small. I worked at a small business. I'm saying don't.
I know. Somebody else was saying it was victimless.
I know. I'm just saying, but at the very least, I want Jason to at least throw in a caveat for small businesses.
It's yeah, fair enough.
At the very least. Okay. You know what? Follow Culturally Illiterate please follow us on Spotify. I'm stunned at the support we've received. Honestly, we're at over 100 subs on YouTube. Most of it's on YouTube, which is awesome. But, if you listen to this there, give us a follow on Spotify too, or on Apple Podcasts if that's what you use. Still subscribe on YouTube, and at illiterate_pod is the @ for any socials we have. Twitter, Instagram. Reach us at culturaliteratePod@gmail.com if you want to send us an email. It's happened once and it made our fucking month. So, what were you gonna say?
Could I plug my surface to air missiles? No.
Oh my god! Yeah, my dad's an arms dealer. He wants to plug his surface to air missiles.
Oh.
This is the best outro we've ever had for sure. But now I've ruined it because I mentioned it. So where was I? I said the email. Next episode, we'll continue with the MCU, the often forgotten second installment, The Incredible Hulk.